My boyfriend mocked me during dinner. He said I looked cheap and that my laughter was annoying. All of this, in Spanish, thinking I didn't understand anything. I smiled the whole time. Then, just before I left, I turned to his family and responded to each insult in perfect Spanish. The crystal glasses sparkled in the dim light of El Cantino. I adjusted the crease in the dark blue dress I'd chosen after 3 hours of agonizing doubt. Brian had said tonight was special, the anniversary of his father's business, and the whole family should be together. His mother Marisol had already given me 2 assessing glances, and his sister Elena hadn't even tried to hide her smirk when I'd accidentally dropped my napkin. "Are you okay?" Brian asked, squeezing my hand lightly under the table. "You seem tense." "I'm fine." I lied with the smile I'd practiced in front of the mirror most of my life. I wanted to impress. I really did. 2 years into the relationship, and this was only the third time I'd met his family. Brian had always found reasons to postpone our dinners together. His mother was tired, his father was busy, his sister was in a bad mood. Tonight, I hoped to finally overcome this strange distance. ¿Qué piensas de la chica?" Pronounced Marisol, addressing her daughter in Spanish. "What do you think of the girl?" My heart skipped a beat. I lowered my eyes, pretending to study the menu while actually trying to keep a nonchalant expression on my face. Brian had never asked if I knew Spanish, and I'd never mentioned that I'd studied it for 4 years at university and spent a semester in Barcelona as an exchange student. "Mira su vestido, tan barato," Elena snorted. "Look at her dress, so cheap." I felt the color flood my cheeks. The dress cost 2 of my teacher's salaries. I'd been saving for 3 months on lunches. "No entiendo qué ve Brian en ella, excepto su carácter suave. Es como un perrito doméstico, siempre ahí, siempre de acuerdo," Marisol replied. "I don't know what Brian found in her, other than a soft character. She's like a pet dog, always there for me, always agreeable." I smiled mechanically as the waiter brought the aperitifs. My fingers trembled slightly as I brought the glass to my lips. "Why doesn't Brian say anything? Why doesn't he stop them? ¿Te has fijado en su risa? Es tan irritante como una hiena," Brian added, making me stiffen. "Did you notice her laugh?" So irritating, like a hyena. My smile stayed in place, but something shivered inside. 2 years. 2 years of meetings, weekends together, plans for the future. 2 years of laughing at his jokes, cooking his favorite meals, listening to his work problems. And this is how he talks about me to his family? "Abby, Mom asks what you do in your free time," Brian translated, though that's not what his mother asked. "Oh, I like to read, and sometimes I go to exhibitions," I answered in English, trying to keep my voice steady. "Ella parece tan simple," Marisol suspiró. "She seems so simple." "Es que no tienes que ser inteligente cuando eres linda y complaciente," Brian hummed. "No need to be smart when you're nice and obliging." I carefully cut off a piece of paella. The rice scattered across the plate. I picked it up with my fork, feeling the heaviness building up inside, turning to anger. "Brian, ¿estás seguro de que quieres presentarla a todos en la fiesta familiar?" "Será una vergüenza," Elena preguntó. "Brian, are you sure you want to introduce her to everyone at the family fiesta familiar?" "It would be embarrassing." I felt like I was drowning. Every word, every taunt came over me like a wave. I thought about how many times I smiled when I wanted to cry. How many times I'd said it's okay when nothing was okay. How long I had let others define my worth. "Ella ni siquiera nota que estamos hablando de ella." "Qué ingenua," Marisol laughed. "She doesn't even notice we're talking about her." How naive. Something clicked inside me. The quiet inner voice that had been whispering for years. Be patient. Keep your head down. Don't cause trouble. Was suddenly silent. In its place was crystal clarity. I slowly put down my fork and knife, straightened my back, raised my eyes, and looked directly at Marisol. "Disculpe, señora," I said in flawless Spanish. "Excuse me, señora." 3 pairs of eyes stared at me. Brian choked on his wine. "Quizás mi vestido no sea del último grito de la moda, Pero al menos tengo la decencia de no insultar a alguien en su cara, pensando que no me entiende, I continued, feeling strangely calm. My dress may not be the most fashionable, but I have the decency not to insult a person to their face, thinking they don't understand me. Marisol's face went pale. Elena stared at her plate. En cuanto a mi risa, I turned to Brian, who was looking at me as if he'd seen a ghost. Tal vez suene como una hiena para ti, pero es auténtica. Algo que claramente falta en esta mesa. As for my laughter, it may sound like a hyena to you, but it's genuine. Something that is conspicuously missing from this table. I stood up, carefully placing my napkin next to my plate. Y sobre presentarme a tu familia. I smiled at Elena, but there was no warmth in that smile. No te preocupes. No habrá ocasión. And about introducing me to your family, don't worry. There won't be that opportunity. I picked up my purse, feeling my knees shake, but continuing to keep my back straight. Gracias por la cena. Ha sido muy educativa. Thank you for dinner. It was very educational. As I walked towards the exit, the restaurant seemed to get quieter. Or maybe it was just the noise in my ears subsiding for the first time in years. I pushed open the heavy door and stepped out into the cool evening air. It wasn't until I was outside that I realized what had happened. I had fought back. For the first time in my life, I didn't swallow my resentment, didn't pretend it was okay. My heart was pounding like crazy, my throat was lumpy, but there was a strange warmth inside, a feeling I couldn't immediately recognize. It was pride, pride in myself. There was the sound of a door opening behind me, quick footsteps on the sidewalk. Abby! Brian's voice sounded confused and a little angry. What the hell are you doing? Why didn't you tell me you knew Spanish? I turned to him slowly. The man I had loved for 2 years suddenly seemed completely foreign to me. Why didn't you tell me you were ashamed of me? I asked quietly. I didn't. You've got it all wrong. We were just joking. It was funny. I wasn't laughing. Abby, you're exaggerating. Come back inside. We'll talk about this. Mom's upset. Your mom's upset? I shook my head. How do you think I've been feeling the last 2 hours? You've been eavesdropping on our conversation. I wasn't eavesdropping. I was sitting at the same table. You just thought you could talk about me like I wasn't there. Something akin to shame flashed across his face, but it was quickly replaced by annoyance. You ruined everything, he said. It was a big night. Yes, I said. Very important. For both of us. I turned and walked away, feeling his eyes on me. Each step felt heavy and light at the same time. Heavy with the realization of loss, light with the feeling of release. Somewhere deep inside, I knew I would never be the same again. Spanish class was over, but the lesson in self-esteem was just beginning. Growing up, my mom always said that good girls don't cause trouble. She would brush my unruly hair before school and say, Abigail, remember, keep a low profile. No one likes an upstart. I nodded, writhing in pain as the brush got stuck in another pile. Our house in suburban Portland was a model of order and quiet. Dad, an accountant for a construction company, came home at 6 p.m. sharp. Mom, the school librarian, would greet him with a smile and dinner on the table. A quiet, measured life. Arguing in our family was considered a sign of bad manners. Men don't like smart women, dear, my mother used to say while helping me with my lessons. Be nice, agree, smile. It's easier to live like that. I listened and memorized. In elementary school, all subjects were easy for me. Teachers praised my diligence, but did not notice my rare, careful questions. By the 5th grade, I learned to be useful. I helped my classmates with their homework, gave them cheat sheets, gave them answers. I wasn't teased, but I wasn't invited to birthday parties either. In high school, I became invisible. Not weird enough to be made fun of, but not bright enough to be noticed either. I joined a literature club where we read classics and discussed poetry. It was there that I first read Lorca in translation and fell in love with the sound of Spanish words. Abby, why don't you speak at literary nights? Mrs. Lawrence, the club leader, asked me one day. You have beautiful essays. I was embarrassed and mumbled something about stage fright. Actually, it wasn't stage fright, it was being noticed, being judged, perhaps criticized. On prom night, I sat with two other quiet girls. We watched our classmates dance, fall in love, live their lives. My mom braided my hair into an elaborate style and lent me her pearl earrings. "You look like a real lady," she said proudly. I nodded and adjusted my too long dress. University was to be an extension of this quiet life. I chose English literature, safe, familiar. But during course registration, I accidentally signed up for Spanish by mixing up my schedule. "You can always transfer to another class," the counselor said when he noticed my mistake. "It's okay," I said in a casual tone. "I'll be fine." That first semester changed everything. Professor Ramirez, a short woman with the energy of a hurricane, wouldn't let us hide. She made everyone talk, make mistakes, try again. "Language is freedom," she said, walking between the rows. "Each new language is a new pair of eyes, a new way of seeing the world." By the end of the first year, I was speaking simple Spanish. By the end of the second, I was reading Marquez in the original. Professor Ramirez suggested I apply for an exchange program in Barcelona. "But I can't do that," I mumbled. "Parents, money, scholarship," she interrupted. "Full. You're one of the best students I've ever taught. Don't miss this chance." My mom cried when I packed my suitcase. "Why would you do that?" she asked. "You have everything here." "I want to see the world," I answered, surprised at my own courage. "Don't forget who you are," she said goodbye. "Keep your head down." Barcelona was an explosion of colors after a black and white life. Gothic cathedrals and modernist buildings, the noise of the Rambla, and the silence of the narrow streets. My hostess, Senora Mercedes, an elderly widow with sly eyes, made me speak only Spanish. "Habla, niña, habla!" she commanded me when I tried to keep silent at dinner. "Speak, girl, speak!" I did. Tentatively at first, with mistakes, then more fluent. By the end of the year, I was thinking in Spanish, dreaming in Spanish. I made friends, real friends who valued me for my thoughts, not my helpfulness. Coming home was painful. My parents didn't understand why I was different, why I started voicing my opinions at dinner, why I'd enrolled in extra Spanish literature classes. "You've changed," Mom said reproachfully. "Yes," I agreed, but instead of the usual guilt, I felt proud. After university, I got a job teaching literature at a private school. My Spanish proved to be a valuable supplement. I taught elective classes for high school students, preparing for language exams. Life got better. I rented a small apartment, got a cat, and spent my evenings reading books. Sometimes I was lonely, but that loneliness seemed better than being close to someone and being invisible. In my third year, the school sent me to a book fair to choose new literature textbooks. There, between the stands of glossy covers, I bumped into him. Brian was standing at the Latin American literature booth, studying the first edition of 100 Years of Solitude. "Do you speak Spanish?" he asked, noticing my interest. "A little," I answered, suddenly remembering my mother's advice to keep my head down. "Do you?" "Enough to know how much gets lost in translation," he smiled. "I'm Brian Madison, the publisher's representative." "Abigail Parker," I introduced myself. "Abby." He was handsome with that classic beauty that never goes out of style. Tall, broad-shouldered, with a strong-willed chin and attentive eyes. But it wasn't that struck me. It was the way he listened, as if every word I said mattered. We talked for 2 hours, about books, about traveling, about music. He talked about his trips to Mexico. I talked about my year in Barcelona. As the fair was closing, he suggested we continue the conversation over dinner. "I know a great Spanish restaurant nearby," he said. "You could appreciate the authenticity of the food." I agreed. For the first time in a long time, I wanted to be noticed. The first few months with Brian were like a dream. He called every day, gave me books in Spanish, took me to theaters and galleries. I felt special, chosen. When he kissed me for the first time on my apartment doorstep, I thought I had finally found my place in the world. The warning signs came gradually, almost imperceptibly. He wrinkled his nose when I wore a brightly colored dress to the concert. "You look like a teenager," he said. "At your age, you should dress more elegantly." I changed the dress to something more understated. He smiled approvingly, and I felt warm at his praise, ignoring the sting of disappointment. He never asked about my work, about my students, about the books I was reading. When I started to tell him, he nodded politely, but quickly turned the conversation to myself, to my projects, to my successes. "Why don't you ever introduce me to your family?" I asked him 6 months into the relationship. "They are very conservative," he answered evasively. "My mom still hopes I'll marry the daughter of my father's partner." I didn't insist. Perhaps I was afraid that his family would see in me what I had always seen in myself: not bright enough, not special enough. A year later, he finally invited me to a family dinner. His mother, an elegant woman with an icy stare, barely shook my hand. His sister Helena, who looked like her mother, only younger, looked me over from head to toe. "So you're a teacher?" Marisol asked in a tone that said, "Just a teacher." "Yes, I teach literature," I replied, feeling myself blush. "How nice," she smiled, but the smile didn't touch her eyes. Brian always liked plain girls. That night, I saw a different Brian for the first time. He laughed at his father's jokes, which struck me as crude. He talked about work in a language full of cynicism. He didn't notice the dismissive glances his mother threw at me. After that evening, our relationship changed. He became more critical, less attentive. I became more obliging, more cautious. I put back on the mask of a smile I thought I'd shed in Barcelona. "Do you have to wear those glasses?" he asked. "They make you look older. You could change your hair to something more modern," he advised. "Why do you always talk about work?" "It's so boring," he sighed. And I, raised to be a good girl, agreed. I changed my glasses, my hair, my topics of conversation. I became what I thought he wanted me to be. When my mom saw us together, she nodded approvingly. "He's from a good family," she said. "Hang on to him." And I did. 2 years. 2 years of smiles and compromise. I put his behavior down to a strong personality, to stress at work, to a difficult relationship with his parents. I convinced myself it was normal to feel invisible around the person you love. Until that night at El Cantino's, when the mask finally cracked. The fall air chilled my heated face. I walked fast, not making my way, just to get away from the restaurant, from Brian, from his family. Behind me was the sound of quickening footsteps. "Abby, wait!" Brian grabbed my elbow, pulling me toward him. "You can't just leave." "Don't touch me." My voice sounded alien, too hard for the Abby he knew. "Get in the car." He nodded at his silver sedan. "Let's not make a scene on the street." I glanced around. A few passers-by were furtively watching us. The old Abby would have agreed immediately, as long as it didn't draw attention. New Abby. I didn't know what she was capable of yet, but frozen fingers and the thought of an expensive cab ride home tipped the scales. "5 minutes," I said. "Then you'll drive me home." The car smelled of his cologne, sandalwood and bergamot. The smell had soothed me before, but now it made me nauseous. Brian started the engine, but didn't move. His fingers drummed on the steering wheel, a sign of irritation I'd learned in 2 years. "Why didn't you tell me you spoke Spanish?" he finally asked. "Why should I have?" I parried. "You never asked. In 2 years, you never once asked me what languages I knew. But you knew my family was from Colombia. You should have mentioned it. So you could insult me in English?" He exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "We didn't insult you." "You got it all wrong." "I understood enough," I replied, staring out the window at the storefronts floating by. "Take me home, please." Wait." His tone softened. "Abby, I admit we were wrong. But you made quite a scene. My mother's in shock." "Your mother's in shock?" I turned to him. What about me? How about the fact that your family was discussing me like some trained monkey? How about the fact that you, the man I spent 2 years with, joined them? It was just a stupid joke. He slapped his hand on the steering wheel. Why are you making a big deal out of this? Because it's not a fly, Brian. It's my life, my self-esteem, my dignity. He looked at me like I was a stranger. Maybe he was. I didn't recognize myself. I'm sorry, he said finally, running a hand through his hair. I was wrong. They were wrong. We'll talk to Mom, explain everything. She'll like you when she knows you better. There was no sincerity in his voice. I'd heard these apologies before, for being late, for forgetting promises, for harsh words. Always the same, always empty. Take me home, I repeated. We spent the rest of the drive in silence. At the door to my house, Brian tried to kiss me goodbye. I pulled away. Abby, don't be like that, he said, his voice hard. You're acting like a child. Good night, Brian, I said, closing the car door. At home, I was greeted by silence and Marlowe, the black cat I'd picked up off the street 3 years ago. He rubbed against my legs, demanding attention. I mechanically poured his food and sank down on the couch, finally letting the tears flow. The first text from Brian came 20 minutes later. You're overreacting. Call me when you've calmed down. The second came an hour later. Mom wants to apologize. Dinner at their house tomorrow? I'll pick you up at 7. I didn't respond to either one. In the morning, the real onslaught began. Calls, texts, even emails. I'm worried. You can't just ignore me. We have to talk like adults. I turned my phone off and went to work. No one at school noticed my condition. I was used to hiding my feelings. Only Rachel, the history teacher, and my only close friend, caught me in the teacher's lounge. What's wrong? She asked, closing the door. You look terrible. Thanks for the compliment, I tried to joke. Brian? She frowned. I nodded, and the words flowed. I told her everything about the restaurant, about the insults, about my response in Spanish. She listened without interrupting, only clenching her fists tighter and tighter. I always knew he was an asshole, Rachel said when I was done. But this is beyond all expectations. Maybe I overreacted. In the back of my mind, a part of me was still looking for excuses for his behavior. No, she cut him off. You finally overreacted. The question is, what are you going to do now? I didn't know. Part of me just wanted to go back to my old life, where all the decisions were made for me. The other part, another part, remembered the feeling of freedom when I finally told the truth. I don't know, I answered honestly. I'd never broken up with a guy before. Abby. Rachel took me by the shoulders. 2 years he hasn't heard you. 2 years he hasn't seen the real you. Don't you think you deserve more than that? I only nodded, afraid the tears would flow again if I spoke. That evening, the house phone rang. It was Mom. Brian had apparently called her without getting an answer from me. Abigail, what have you done? Her voice sounded worried. Brian says you threw a tantrum at the restaurant. It wasn't a tantrum, Mom. I held the phone to my ear, trying to stay calm. I was just responding to insults. What insults? Brian said it was a misunderstanding. His mother is very upset. I'm upset too, I replied. They said horrible things about me, thinking I didn't understand Spanish. Oh, honey, her voice softened. Men can be insensitive sometimes. His mother is just worried about her son. I'm sure she didn't mean to hurt you. No, she called me cheap and a pet. My voice shook with anger. Brian laughed at my laughter. They were discussing whether it would be embarrassing to introduce me to other relatives. There was a pause. I could almost see Mom going over in her mind all the possible excuses for this behavior. You must have misunderstood, she said finally. Your Spanish isn't that good. My Spanish is great, Mom. You know that. Then it was just a joke. You've always been overly sensitive, Abby. Men don't like hysterical women. I know the words. Same song I've heard my whole life. I'm not hysterical, Mom. I just don't want to be with a man who doesn't respect me anymore. But he's such a good boy. From a decent family, with a promising job. You're not getting any younger, Abby. Don't throw men like that away. I closed my eyes. Could I blame her? She just wanted for me what she had for herself, a stable marriage, security, a life without sharp edges. I'll think about it, Mom. I lied. I had to go. The next 3 days passed like a blur. I went to work, came home, stared at the growing number of missed calls from Brian. There was a war going on inside me. The old Abby was begging to give up, to apologize, to get back to normal. The new Abby, weak but stubborn, was on the defensive. On the 4th day, he showed up at my door, with a bouquet of burgundy roses, my favorite, and a look of humility on his face. Abby, please, he said instead of greeting me. Let's talk. I let him in, noticing how he looked critically at my homemade clothes, old jeans and a stretchy sweater. I was wrong, Brian began, holding out the flowers. What happened at the restaurant? It's unforgivable. I should have protected you. I didn't take the bouquet. Something in his tone, in the look in his eyes, seemed insincere. Why didn't you protect me? I asked. Why did you join them? He sighed, setting the flowers down. My mother, she's a complicated person. I used to agree with her to avoid conflict. Suddenly, I saw a similarity between us. Both of us were used to giving in to avoid causing problems. But there was a difference. He was shifting his discomfort onto others. Me. I want us to start over, he continued. I explained everything to my mom. She wants to apologize in person. We could have dinner at their place this Saturday. No, I replied. He blinked, not understanding. What do you mean, no? It means I don't want to have dinner with your family. I don't want to start over. I don't want to continue a relationship where I'm disrespected. You're still angry. He tried to take my hand. That's okay. But you can't make these decisions in an emotional state. I'm not angry, Brian, I replied calmly. I just don't want to be with you anymore. His face changed. The mask of the caring boyfriend was gone, giving way to something cold and calculating. Is this about that guy from your school? What's his name, Jason? Jason's married and 20 years older than me. I shook my head. This isn't about another man. This is about me. What do you want, Abby? His voice became harsh. You want me on my knees to apologize? Okay, I'll get on my knees. Is that what you want? I need you to leave, I said, surprised at my own calm. Please. You'll regret this. He tossed the bouquet onto the couch. When you cool down and realize you threw away 2 years of a relationship over one stupid joke, it'll be too late. It wasn't a joke, Brian. It was a moment of truth. I saw who you really are. He looked at me in disbelief. Who are you? He finally asked. I don't recognize you. I don't recognize myself either, I answered honestly. But I think I like this new version better. When the door closed behind him, I waited for the usual rush of regret, the urge to rush after him, to apologize, to put things back the way they were. But it didn't come. Instead, I felt strangely light, as if I'd dropped the heavy backpack I'd been carrying for years. I walked over to the mirror in the hallway. The same Abby looked back at me, the same brown hair, the same green eyes, the same freckles on her nose. But something had changed. Maybe the line of her lips had gotten firmer. Maybe my shoulders were a little broader. I didn't know what was next for me. For the first time, I didn't have a clear plan approved by someone else. It was frightening. But, in a strange way, it was also inspiring. Marlowe jumped up on the nightstand and rubbed against my arm. I scratched him behind his ear, listening to his soothing purr. We'll be fine, I told him. We will, won't we? He blinked his amber eyes, and I thought there was agreement in them. 5 months later, I stood in the middle of my new apartment, surrounded by boxes labeled kitchen, bedroom, and books. Sunlight poured into the living room through the large windows. That was the first thing that had attracted me when the realtor showed me this apartment. Small but bright, on the 3rd floor of an old brick building, it cost more than my old place, but I figured I deserved it. Marlowe had already settled in, choosing a sunny windowsill for himself. He stretched out at full length, as if to say, I approve of this choice. The doorbell rang, making me wince. Rachel stood on the doorstep with a bottle of wine and a box of pizza. A housewarming without pizza isn't a housewarming, she announced as she walked inside. Wow! So much light! That's why I chose this apartment, I said, pulling glasses from the half-unpacked box. No more hiding in the shadows. Rachel smiled, pouring the wine. Here's to the new Abby and her sunny apartment. We clinked glasses, and I thought about how much had changed over the months. After my breakup with Brian, I expected to fall apart, but instead, something in me had strengthened. It's like I've finally found my center. Had you told your mom about the move yet? Rachel asked, taking a bite of pizza. Yeah, I sighed. She thinks I'm making a mistake. Too expensive, too far from school, too hasty. And what did you say? That it's my decision and my life. I was surprised at how easily the words came off my lips. Before, I would have apologized, made excuses, promised to think about it. The new job was also my decision. The school where I taught had opened evening classes for adults, and I volunteered to teach a Spanish literature class. My first class consisted of 12 people, ranging from students to retirees, all of whom wanted not just to learn the language, but to understand the culture. On the third class, one of the students, a middle-aged lawyer, criticized my choice of text. Marquez is too difficult for beginners, he said. We spend more time translating than discussing. The old Abby would have apologized immediately and changed the syllabus. The new Abby took a deep breath and calmly replied, I understand your concern, Michael. But I chose this story precisely because its language is rich and evocative. We are here not only to translate, but also to experience the beauty of the Spanish language. If you need help with the text, I can give you extra time after class. Michael looked surprised, but nodded. After class, he came over to apologize. You're right, he said. I'm just used to being an expert in my field, and I don't feel comfortable when I don't understand something. I know the feeling, I replied. But sometimes it's good to be a beginner. This small victory galvanized me. I began practicing setting boundaries in other situations. I gave up extra responsibilities at school that I had always agreed to. Stopped answering work emails after 6 p.m. Said no when a friend asked me to babysit her kids on my only day off. Each no was hard for me to say. Each time I fought the guilt, the mother's voice in my head. But each time it got easier. It was during this period that I met Noah. He came to work at our school as a history teacher, replacing Mr. Foster, who had retired. Tall, with disheveled brown hair and thin-rimmed glasses, he looked like a typical scientist. I first noticed him in the teacher's lounge when he was arguing with the head teacher about the need for field trips. History is not just dates and facts, he said with passion in his voice. It is a living experience. Children need to see the places we tell them about. His enthusiasm was infectious. I caught myself smiling as I listened to his arguments. We began to cross paths more often, in the cafeteria, at meetings, in the hallways. He always said hello, often asking about my classes. Unlike Brian, Noah actually listened to the answers. I hear you're taking a course on Marquez, he said at lunch one day. I've always wanted to read 100 Years of Solitude in the original, but my Spanish is stuck at the ¿Dónde está la biblioteca level? I laughed, not covering my mouth with my hand, as I had done before, when Brian wrinkled his nose at my too loud laughter. I could recommend something simpler for you to start with, I suggested. So began our conversations about literature, history, languages. Nothing personal, no pressure. But I could sense his interest, in the way he leaned closer as he listened to me, in the way he memorized the little things I mentioned in passing. At the same time, I started seeing a therapist. Dr. Martinez, a middle-aged woman with penetrating eyes and a soft voice, helped me understand the reasons for my compliant nature. Tell me about your childhood, she asked in the first session. What messages did you receive from your parents? Be a good girl, I answered automatically. Don't cause trouble, keep your head down. What happened when you broke those rules? I thought about it, remembering the rare occasions of my disobedience. How I got a C in sixth grade math, and my mom was silent and disappointed for a week. How I wanted to go to a school dance, and my father said that decent girls don't go to such events. How I once raised my voice in an argument, and my mom cried, saying I was breaking her heart. I wasn't physically punished, I said slowly, but I felt guilt, like I had betrayed their expectations. It's a very powerful tool of control, Doctor. Martinez nodded. Much more effective than overt prohibitions. With each session, I understood more and more about the roots of my problem. How I had learned to put other people's needs before my own. How I sought approval, even if I had to give up my own desires to do so. You don't have to be comfortable for everyone, Abby, Dr. Martinez said at one of our meetings. Your value is not determined by how useful you are to others. This thought seemed so simple and yet so revolutionary. One day, sitting in a coffee shop near my new apartment, I saw a familiar face. Elena, Brian's sister, was standing in line for coffee. My first inclination was to hide, but then I thought, why? I hadn't done anything wrong. She spotted me as she picked up her order. After a moment's hesitation, she walked over to my table. Abby, she said awkwardly. It's been a long time. 5 months, I answered calmly. May I? Dash. She pointed to the chair across from me. I nodded, though part of me wanted to say no. How are you? Elena asked, avoiding my eyes. Good, I answered honestly. And how's Brian? He's fine. He's seeing someone new. I expected a stab of jealousy or resentment, but I felt only mild relief. I'm happy for him, I said. Listen, Elena finally looked at me. What happened at the restaurant? We didn't mean to hurt you. It was just a stupid joke. The old Abby would have said, it's okay, and changed the subject. The new Abby shook her head. It wasn't a joke, Elena. Jokes are funny to everyone involved. What you were doing is called bullying. You don't understand. She twirled her cup nervously. Brian always had a complicated relationship with his mom. He just wanted her to like him. At my expense, I didn't ask, I asserted. He didn't want... She paused, seeing the look on my face. Okay, maybe you're right, but he did love you in his own way. In your own way isn't a good enough way to love, I replied. I deserve better than that. Everyone deserves more. We finished our coffee in silence. As Elena was leaving, she suddenly said, You've changed, Abby, in a good way. This meeting left a strange sense of closure, like I'd finally closed the door on the past. A week later, Noah invited me to a Spanish guitar concert. I thought you might be interested, he said with that half smile he had when he was nervous. Sure, if you're not busy. I hesitated. I liked Noah. His passion for his subject, his kindness to his students, his respect for his coworkers. But I was still afraid of becoming comfortable again, of losing myself in a relationship again. Is this a date? I asked bluntly. He blinked, clearly not expecting that question, but then smiled wider. Yeah, if that's okay with you. But it could just be a friendly outing if you prefer. I appreciated his honesty. A date sounds good, I replied, but I need to get something straight. We were sitting in the schoolyard, taking advantage of the last warm days of fall. Around us, students were playing ball, laughing, living their carefree lives. I recently got out of a difficult relationship, I began. And I'm still learning how to be myself, setting boundaries, to say what I think. He listened intently without interrupting. I'm not ready for anything serious, I continued, and I don't want to rush into it. If it's a problem, it's not a problem, Noah said calmly. I respect your honesty. And to be honest, I'm not looking for anything serious right now either. My divorce was finalized only a year ago. You were married? I was surprised. He'd never mentioned it. 7 years. He wrinkled his nose slightly. That's a long story. I'll tell it someday if you want to hear it. Maybe I would, I replied, but not on the first date. He laughed, and I realized I liked his laugh open. A little husky. So music first, then stories? He suggested. Sounds like a plan, I agreed. On the day of the concert, I spent a long time choosing what to wear. Not for Noah, for me. I decided on the red dress I'd been wanting to buy for a long time, but I'd been hesitant because of the bright color. Brian would say it was too garish, but Brian was no longer in my life. Noah was waiting for me at the entrance to the concert hall. His eyes widened when he saw me. "Wow," he said simply. "You look amazing." "Thank you," I replied, not apologizing for the bright color or the exposed shoulders. The concert was great. The guitarist, an elderly Spaniard with knotty fingers and fiery eyes, pulled sounds from his instrument that made me cry and laugh. I closed my eyes, letting the music carry me away. "What are you thinking about?" Noah asked as we left the hall. "That Spanish has always been my salvation," I answered. "First the language, then literature, now music. It's like I find something in it that's missing in my normal life." "Passion," he said without thinking. "Spanish culture is not afraid of big feelings. It's not afraid of being real." I looked at him in surprise. He understood what I couldn't articulate on my own. We went to a small cafe nearby. The conversation flowed easily, about music, about our students, about the books we'd been reading lately. No pressure, no expectations. As he walked me to the door, I felt the familiar tension of the moment. Would he kiss me? Would he not kiss me? What should I do? "Thanks for tonight," Noah said, making no attempt to move closer. "I really had a good time." "Me too," I replied sincerely. "Maybe we could do it again sometime." There was an uncertainty in his voice that only made him more attractive. I nodded, and then, on a sudden impulse, stood on my tiptoes and kissed him lightly on the cheek. "I will," I said, and opened the door to my new apartment, my new life. Sunlight fell on my desk, where 2 cups of coffee stood, my almost empty one, and Noah's full cup, who was always late for our breakfast together. I checked my Words Without Borders blog stats. The latest article on regional dialects of Spanish had garnered almost 3,000 views in a week. When I created this blog a year and a half ago, just to structure my own thoughts on languages and culture, I never imagined it would find an audience. "Sorry I'm late." Noah entered the room, buttoning his shirt as he walked. His hair was damp from his shower, and there was a pillow mark on his cheek. I overslept again. "I know," I smiled, handing him a cup. "Do you have a first period class today?" "Yeah." He took a sip and closed his eyes blissfully. "You're saving me." "How was the webinar yesterday?" "Surprisingly well. There were almost 100 participants asking interesting questions." I pushed my laptop away. "Did you finish your article?" Noah taught history at our school, but at the same time, he was working on his dissertation on the impact of Spanish colonization on the culture of the American Southwest. My interest in Spanish and his fascination with history created unexpected points of intersection in our conversations. "Almost," he grumbled, stuck on the conclusion. "I think I've said everything in the main part." "Let me read it tonight," I suggested. Maybe a fresh set of eyes would help. He nodded gratefully. Our relationship developed slowly, without haste, with constant respect for each other's space. We didn't live together, though we stayed at each other's houses often. We each had our own jobs, our own hobbies, our own friends. But in doing so, we created something in common, a space of trust and support that I had sorely lacked before. "Don't forget that you have a class at the center at 6, Noah reminded me, finishing his coffee. "I remember," I glanced at my watch. "And afterward, I have to get ready for my performance at the festival tomorrow." The annual literary festival was an important event for the local community. This time, I was invited to give a workshop on poetry translation, a small but significant victory for me. My work with immigrants at the community center started by chance. I saw an ad looking for volunteers to teach English, and thought it would be a good way to utilize my skills. What started as a weekly class of 2 hours turned into a real passion. My students, from teenagers to seniors, came from different countries and spoke different languages, but they all struggled with the same problem: feeling invisible in a new country. When I can't speak, I feel like a ghost. Ramon, an elderly Mexican who worked as a gardener in wealthy homes, once told me, "People look right through me." His words hit something deep inside me. I, too, knew what it was like to be invisible, even when you were around people who should see you. That night, my class was especially lively. We practiced situational dialogues: how to make a doctor's appointment, how to communicate with the children's teachers, how to negotiate the terms of a lease with a landlord. Ms. Abby, how do I say I don't agree with the price? Layla, a young woman from Syria, asked, I don't want to be rude. You can say, I'm afraid this price is too high for me. Could we negotiate? I said the phrase slowly, letting them hear every sound. You don't have to agree just because you're afraid of being impolite. Being polite and not having an opinion are different things. I saw some of them interject. It was a lesson not only in English, but also in self-respect. After class, I hurried home to prepare for tomorrow's performance. Flipping through my notes, I remembered how 2 years ago I had been afraid to speak my mind, even in a small circle. Now I was preparing to speak in front of an audience of strangers. The morning of the festival day was clear and cool. The square in front of the city library was filled with publishers' booths, bookstalls, and small stages for performances. Noah couldn't come with me. He had an important meeting with his supervisor, but Rachel promised to come to support me. My talk was scheduled for 11 in the morning. I talked about how translating poetry requires not only knowledge of the language, but also an understanding of the cultural context, historical allusions, even the musicality of the original. I read my translations of Lorca and Neruda and explained my choice of words and images. People listened attentively, asked questions. When it was over, several people came up to thank me and exchange contacts. It was really interesting, said a young woman with a notebook full of notes. Do you teach somewhere? I told her about my blog and webinars and gave her my business card. Rachel, who was standing nearby, gave me a thumbs up and said silently, You were great. After the show, Rachel and I wandered between the booths, leafing through the new releases and discussing the latest literary awards. At the Latin American literature booth, I froze. Among the books was the same one, 100 Years of Solitude, the first edition Brian had reviewed when we met. What is it? Rachel asked, noticing my confusion. I didn't have time to answer. As if materializing from my memories, Brian appeared a few feet away from us. Standing next to him was a slender blonde in an elegant linen suit, the exact opposite of my current look in the brightly colored dress and massive earrings. Abby? He noticed me, a look of surprise on his face. What a surprise. Hello, Brian. I smiled, feeling strangely calm. No trembling, no heaviness in my stomach, just a slight nostalgia, like meeting an old acquaintance. Did you perform tonight? He nodded at the speaker's badge that was still pinned to my dress. Yes, a poetry translation workshop. Wow! He looked genuinely surprised. I didn't know you were doing that. A lot has changed in 2 years, I replied simply. Rachel delicately stepped back, saying she wanted to look at the books at the next booth. The blonde girl stepped back as well, apparently sensing a slight tension. This is Victoria, my fiancé, Brian said, following my gaze. We met at work. Congratulations. I was really happy for him. When's the wedding? August. Mom will organize everything, he smiled. But there was some uncertainty in his smile. And you, do you have someone? Yes. I didn't go into details. We've been together for over a year. There was an awkward pause. Before, I would have rushed to fill it with words, questions, comments. Now I just waited. You look good, he finally said. Happy. I am happy, I replied. I hope you are too. He nodded, but something in his eyes made me doubt it. A slight shadow of dissatisfaction? Regret? I couldn't quite pinpoint it. Mom asks about you sometimes, he said suddenly. She still thinks you misunderstood that conversation. I felt a familiar irritation rise up inside, but it faded quickly. It didn't matter anymore. Give her my best, I said, and best wishes for the wedding. Abby, you've really changed. There was something like admiration mixed with incomprehension in his voice. Yes, I agreed. But you know what the best part is? I was finally being me. We said goodbye, exchanging formal good luck wishes. When he left, I didn't feel hurt or regret, but quiet gratitude. That night at the restaurant, the first time I spoke Spanish on my own behalf, had been a turning point in my life. Rachel returned, looking at me carefully. Are you okay? More than okay, I smiled. Come on, I want to buy the new Lorca book. Wednesday night, my immigrant class was especially crowded. Ramon brought his teenage granddaughter, who had recently arrived from Mexico. Layla showed up with a neighbor who was afraid to leave the house because of the language barrier. Even the shy Farhad, who usually sat silent, came with a prepared story about his job as a mechanic. Today, I said, looking around at their faces, we're going to talk about the power of words. How language can be both a wall and a bridge. I asked each person to write a short story about a time when they felt powerless because of a language barrier. We then read these stories aloud, discussing how we could make a difference, what words and phrases might help. When I don't understand what people are saying, I feel stupid, admitted Ramon's granddaughter, Carmen. At school, everyone makes fun of my accent. I remember that feeling, I said. When I was in Spain, the first months were very difficult. I knew the language, but I couldn't catch all the nuances, all the jokes, all the cultural references. Sometimes I would just nod and smile, even though I didn't understand anything. What helped? Layla asked. The realization that it's okay to be wrong, that an accent is not a flaw, but a sign that you know more than one language. I looked at Carmen. And that those who laugh at you are often just jealous of your courage. After class, Ramon came over to thank me. My granddaughter smiled for the first time in a week, he said. She says she wants to be like you when she grows up. His words touched me to the core. I didn't think of myself as a role model. I still had moments of insecurity, moments when my mother's voice was in my head, telling me to keep my head down. But I learned to recognize those moments and deal with them. Noah was waiting for me at home with dinner and a bottle of wine. We settled on the balcony, watching the sun set over the horizon, coloring the sky in shades of orange and pink. How was the meeting at the festival? He asked, pouring the wine. I told him about my performance, the positive feedback, the unexpected meeting with Brian. And how did you feel? There was no jealousy in his voice, only genuine concern. Strange, but calm, I thought, searching for words. Like he was a character from a book I'd read a long time ago. I remember the story, but I don't feel it emotionally anymore. Noah nodded understandingly. You know what struck me today? I continued. Carmen, Ramon's granddaughter, said she wanted to be like me. I never thought I could be an example to anyone. Why not? Dash. He gently took my hand. You're strong, smart, compassionate. You went through a difficult time and came out of it a more whole person. I wish I could be like you, too. I laughed, but his words warmed me from the inside out. I still have my moments of doubt, I admitted. Days when I hear my mom's voice in my head, and I want to hide. When I'm afraid to say no or speak my mind. It's normal. He shook my hand. Perfection is a boring goal. It's much more interesting to be in the process of becoming. We sat in silence, watching the first stars appear in the darkening sky. I thought about my journey from a girl who was afraid to cause trouble to a woman who learned to value her voice. It wasn't a fairy tale with a happy ending. I still had fears, doubts, insecurities, but now I knew I could handle them. The language that had once been my refuge became a bridge to other people, to my students, to myself. I found my words, not perfect, sometimes clumsy, but sincere. And never again will I let anyone silence me.
Любі глядачі, дякую вам за перегляд, ставте лайки та підписуйтесь на канал. Також напишіть в коментарях, чи погоджуєтесь ви з Дженніфер, чи вона мала розказати все матері, чи ні, чи мала все розказати своєму коханцю щодо свого чоловіка, чи ні. І також прокоментуйте, чи вам сподобалось це відео.